My son-in-law grabbed my late wife's crystal nativity scene off the mantel and hurled it against the fireplace. The sound it made when it shattered was the kind of sound that lives in your bones long after the room goes quiet. He looked at me across the wreckage of 40 years of Christmas tradition and said, "Sign the house over tonight, old man, or you will die in it alone." I wiped the ceramic dust off my sleeve, looked at my daughter sitting frozen on the couch, and picked up my phone. I dialed one number. "Merry Christmas, Walter," I said when my brother answered. "It is time." He said 4 words back. "The package is ready." 22 minutes later, they lost everything. And I mean everything. But let me back up, because you need to understand how we got here. You need to understand what kind of man sits at a Christmas dinner table and tells his 67-year-old father-in-law that he has until midnight to hand over the deed to a house he built with his own hands. You need to understand what kind of woman watches her husband do it and says nothing. My daughter brought my son-in-law home 6 years ago. She was 31. He was 35. His name is not important, but I will call him what he is, my son-in-law, because that title is the only thing that ever connected us. He came to that first dinner in a sport coat that was slightly too big for him, with a handshake that was slightly too firm, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. My wife was still alive then. She pulled me into the kitchen while he was in the bathroom and she whispered to me, "Something is off about him." I told her she was being protective. I told her our daughter was happy. I told her to give him a chance. My wife died 14 months later, and I have been giving myself grief about that conversation ever since. He started small. That is how men like him always start. A comment about the neighborhood. "You know what this house would sell for right now, Pop?" He called me Pop from the very beginning, even though I never invited it. A few months later, he started referencing my retirement. "How long do you think you can keep up a place this size on a fixed income?" I am not on a fixed income, but he did not know that. I never corrected him. My wife used to say that a man who shows you his hand too early loses the game before it starts. She was a pharmacist for 32 years. She understood the slow chemistry of things. My daughter, my beautiful, brilliant daughter who graduated top of her class from Chapel Hill, who used to correct my crossword answers from the back seat of the car when she was 9 years old, somewhere along the way she dimmed herself. I watched it happen slowly, the way a pilot light goes down before a furnace dies. She stopped finishing her sentences around him. She started checking his face before she laughed at my jokes. By the time they got married 3 years ago, she looked at me sometimes with an expression I can only describe as apologetic, as if she was sorry for something she could not stop. The Christmas dinner started at 2 in the afternoon. My son-in-law arrived with my daughter and with his parents, people I had met exactly 4 times. His mother is the kind of woman who assesses the value of a room before she says hello to the people in it. His father shook my hand and then immediately walked to my built-in bookcase and started reading the spines like a man making an inventory. They set their coats down on my couch without asking. His mother kicked off her shoes in the entry hall and left them in the middle of the floor. Small things. The kind of small things that tell you exactly what a person believes about their place in the world and their place in yours. I had cooked for 6 hours. I do not say that to be pitied. I say it because my wife taught me to cook the way she taught me everything. Methodically, lovingly, with the understanding that the act of preparing food for people you care about is a form of respect. I had made the standing rib roast she used to make. I had made her mother's sweet potato casserole from a recipe card, written in handwriting so faded I had to use a magnifying glass. I had set the table with the good china. I had opened a bottle of wine I had been saving since before my daughter was born. His mother picked up a wine glass, looked at the bottom of it, and set it back down as if she found it lacking. His father poured himself a glass without being offered one and took it to the living room. My son-in-law sat at the head of the table. Not his seat, my seat. He did it without hesitation, the way you do a thing when you have been planning it long enough that it feels natural. I sat down to his left. I did not say anything about the seat. My daughter sat across from me and would not look up from her plate. The conversation during dinner was the kind that happens in a house where everyone is pretending. His mother talked about real estate. The market, she said, was extraordinary right now. Houses in my neighborhood were selling for amounts she named carefully, watching my face as she named them. His father talked about a friend of his, a contractor he knew personally, who could renovate a property like this one in under 6 months and flip it for substantial profit. My son-in-law cut his meat and nodded slowly at everything his father said, as if they were discussing something already decided. I ate my roast. I refilled my daughter's wine glass. She thanked me in a voice so small it nearly disappeared. After dinner, while his mother was walking through my downstairs rooms with the focused attention of a woman who has already chosen what she wants to keep, my son-in-law pushed back from the table and looked at me directly for the first time all evening. "We should talk," he said. I said I was listening. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and laid a folded document on the table between us. He smoothed it out with both hands the way a man does when he wants you to understand he has been carrying it for a while. It was a quitclaim deed. My name was on it. His name was on it. The address was this house. The house my wife and I bought 33 years ago. The house where my daughter learned to walk in the hallway and lost her first tooth on the back porch step. I looked at the document for a long time. Then I looked at him. "You want me to sign my house over to you?" I said. He leaned back and crossed his arms. He said it was not really my house anymore in any practical sense. He said the property taxes alone were going to become unmanageable for a man my age on a retirement income. He said it was not a gift, it was an arrangement. I could stay in the house as long as I was capable of caring for myself, but the deed would transfer tonight. He and my daughter would be the legal owners. That way, he said, when the time came and I needed additional care, there would be no probate complications. He said he was doing this for me. I asked my daughter if this was what she wanted. She stared at the table. She said she thought it made sense financially. I asked her to look at me when she said that. She could not do it. I said I needed a few minutes and I started to stand up. That is when his mother walked back into the dining room holding my wife's jewelry box. It was a rosewood box with a brass latch that sat on top of my wife's dresser. It had been there since the week we moved in. It was not in the living room. It was not anywhere she should have been. She had walked upstairs, into my bedroom, opened the door, and helped herself. "I was just looking," she said when she saw my face. "This is lovely. Is this costume or is this real?" She was holding my wife's pearl necklace up to the light. My daughter made a sound. It was a small, fractured sound. The sound of a person watching a thing break and knowing they could have prevented it. I walked to the woman, took my wife's necklace out of her hand without saying a word, and placed it back in the box. I closed the latch. I carried the box to my study, unlocked the door, set it inside on the desk, and locked the door behind me. I heard my son-in-law's voice from the hallway before I even got the deadbolt turned. He said if I was going in there to make phone calls, I should know that it would not change anything. He said the situation was what it was. He said I was a stubborn old man who could not see what was obvious to everyone else, that I could not manage on my own, that the house was too big, that my time of being in charge of anything was over. I sat down at my desk. My hands were not shaking. I have always found that in moments of genuine crisis, the body does something useful. It goes still. My wife used to say I was the only man she knew who got calmer when things got worse. She said it was one of the things she loved about me and one of the things that sometimes infuriated her. I opened the second drawer of my desk and took out my phone, the backup one I keep in here, the one nobody knows about. I dialed my brother Walter. Walter is 63. He spent 25 years as a forensic CPA for the IRS before he went private. He does not call himself an investigator. He calls himself an accountant who pays attention. He has been paying attention to my son-in-law for 14 months, ever since the first time I called him with a concern. Walter is not a dramatic man. He delivers information the way a surgeon makes an incision. Clean, precise, no wasted movement. "Are you ready?" Walter asked me. I told him what had happened. The deed, the jewelry box, my daughter's silence. "Then yes," he said. "It is time. I am 20 minutes out. The others are staged." I asked him what that meant. He said, the others and I knew he meant the people he had called, the specific people he had called, and I understood then that whatever happened in the next 20 minutes would not be reversible. I said, "Do it." "Merry Christmas, George," Walter said. I hung up. I turned on my computer monitors. 3 years ago, After an incident in the neighborhood, I had installed a security system throughout the house. Not the visible kind with the little cameras in the corners that people adjust to avoid. The kind that looks like something else. The motion sensors in the hallways, the smoke detectors in the living room. My son-in-law had not found them because he had never looked for them. He did not think I was that kind of man. What I saw on those monitors turned my stomach in ways that the deed and the jewelry box had not quite managed. His father was in my garage. He had found the key on the hook inside the kitchen door. The key I kept there for 30 years because I trusted the people in my home. He was moving through the garage with his phone out, taking photographs, my tools, my workbench, my late wife's gardening equipment that I still could not bring myself to donate. He was photographing all of it, the way an estate agent photographs a property before listing it. His mother was back upstairs. She was in the guest room now, the one that had been my daughter's room growing up. She had opened the closet. She was looking at the boxes I keep there, the ones labeled in my wife's handwriting, Christmas ornaments, Emily's school things, hospital paperwork, 2019. She was not reading the labels with any kind of reverence. She was reading them the way you read expiration dates. My son-in-law was at the kitchen table with the deed still in front of him. He was on his phone. I turned up the audio on that camera. He was talking to someone, a lawyer I did not recognize by name, telling this person that the old man was being difficult, but that it was just fear talking, and that they would have the signatures tonight. He said the property would be in their names by end of week. He said, "No, the daughter is handled. The daughter is handled." I sat with that phrase for a moment. I let it do what it needed to do to me. Then, I set it aside. The pounding on my study door started about 12 minutes in. My son-in-law first, demanding I come out and be reasonable. Then his father, who apparently found the garage insufficient entertainment and wanted new territory to survey. I heard his mother somewhere down the hall telling my daughter that this was all going to work out, that once the paperwork was settled, everything would be simpler. My daughter said something I could not hear. His mother said, "Honey, you are too sentimental. That has always been your problem." I opened the second drawer again. I took out a folder. Walter had given it to me 3 weeks ago, told me to keep it somewhere safe, and told me I would know when to use it. I opened it. My son-in-law's financial history looked like a map of a man who had been running from something for a very long time. 2 failed businesses in 4 years, one in Charlotte and one in Raleigh. The Charlotte one had been a property management company that collapsed under an insurance fraud investigation. The case had been settled quietly, which is to say expensively, which is to say someone had paid for it to go away. Walter had found the payment records. The someone was a private lender in Atlanta whose name appeared in 3 other fraud-adjacent case files Walter had cross-referenced. The second business was a real estate development LLC that had taken in 11 investors and returned money to none of them. Walter had located 8 of those investors. They were not happy people. There was more. A tax lien in Mecklenburg County, a civil judgment in Wake County, a pattern Walter had written in the margins in his careful accountant's script of exploiting people who trusted him before the structure collapsed. He had married my daughter 14 months after my wife died. He had proposed 6 weeks after the funeral. My daughter told me it felt right. She told me he was steady, and she needed steady. I had swallowed every instinct I had because she looked, for the first time in a long year, like she was not drowning. I looked at the last page of the folder. It was a printout of a bank statement, my son-in-law's account. The deposits told a story I already knew in outline but had never seen written out in numbers. He was 3 months behind on their apartment lease. The car payments had lapsed in October. He had taken a cash advance on a credit card to pay for Christmas dinner. He was not a man who wanted my house as a financial strategy. He was a man who needed my house to survive the next 60 days. That changes things. It does not change what he is, but it changes the texture of what he was doing. Desperate men are more dangerous than greedy ones. Desperate men do not think about tomorrow because they cannot see past tonight. The door handle turned. He had found a way in, or thought he had, because the deadbolt is not visible from the outside, and he rattled the handle 3 times before understanding he was not getting through that way. "Open the door," he said, and I noticed for the first time that the bravado was thinner now. The voice underneath it was scared. I stood up. I put the folder inside my jacket. I straightened my shirt. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. He was standing in the hallway with his sleeves rolled up, his father just behind him, his mother at the top of the staircase with her arms crossed. My daughter was at the bottom of the stairs looking up at all of us with the expression of someone watching an accident happen in slow motion. "You are not signing, are you?" he said. It was not a question. I said no. He stepped forward. He was taller than me by 2 inches, and he had apparently decided that this was going to matter. He said this was not optional. He said I was elderly, I was alone, and I was not capable of understanding what was in my own best interest. He said if I did not sign the deed tonight, he would begin the process of having me assessed for cognitive decline. He had already spoken to a doctor, he said. A doctor he knew personally. He said it would be his word and his wife's word against mine, and a man my age with no close family present was not in a strong position in that kind of proceeding. "Your wife," I said, looking past him to where my daughter stood at the bottom of the stairs. "Is that what you want to tell me? That your wife will testify against her father?" My daughter opened her mouth. Her husband cut her off. "She will do what she needs to do," he said. I looked at my daughter for a long time. She looked back at me. Something moved through her face. I have been her father for 37 years. I know every weather system that passes through that face. This one was a storm breaking. "Enough," my daughter said. Her voice was quiet, but it was solid in a way I had not heard in years. "That is enough." Her husband turned around. He told her to stay out of it. She said, "This is my father's house. I am not signing anything." Her father-in-law said something dismissive from the staircase. Her mother-in-law told her she was being emotional. Her husband took 2 steps toward her and lowered his voice and said something I could not fully hear. But the words what we talked about were in it, and so was the word consequences. My daughter looked at him. She looked at the man she had married, and I watched something finish between them in real time. I watched the last thread go. She said, "I want you to leave." He laughed. It was not a kind laugh. That was when the front door opened. Walter has a key. He has had a key for 6 years. He is my brother and my daughter's godfather, and there is not a door in my life that Walter does not have a key to. He came in without knocking, which is his right, and he was not alone. Behind him was a man in a county sheriff's jacket, and behind that man were 2 more. And behind all of them was a woman in a dark suit, who I later learned was from the North Carolina Secretary of State's office. My son-in-law's father made a sound from the staircase that I can only describe as all the air going out of a balloon. Walter walked into the hallway and looked at the scene with the expression he has used since we were children, the one that says he has already done the math and everyone else is about to find out what the answer is. He looked at my son-in-law. He looked at the father on the stairs. He looked at the mother with her arms still crossed. He reached into his coat and took out a document. "You have been served," Walter said to my son-in-law, handing him the papers. "That is a civil complaint on behalf of 7 investors from your Raleigh LLC, refiled this morning with the Wake County Clerk. There is also a notice from the NC Insurance Commissioner's office regarding the Charlotte matter, which, as it turns out, did not settle as cleanly as you believed." He looked at the father. "And if you are the Theodore I think you are, there is a separate envelope here for you regarding your role as a named officer in that same Charlotte entity." He handed the second envelope up the stairs without looking at him. My son-in-law stared at the papers in his hands. His face went through 4 or 5 different expressions very quickly and did not settle on any of them. "You had me investigated," he said, looking at me. I said that Walter was my brother and that Walter paid attention. "You cannot do this," he said. "You are trying to destroy us." Walter said, calmly and without malice, that no one had destroyed anything. He said the structures were already compromised when Walter found them. He said a forensic accountant does not create problems, he simply illuminates the ones that exist. My son-in-law's mother came down the stairs. She told my daughter that this was my fault, that I had never welcomed her son, that I had been working against their marriage since the beginning. My daughter told her she needed to collect her coat and her shoes from the entry hall and she needed to do it now. Her mother-in-law looked at her as if she had never really seen her before. My daughter looked back at her and did not blink. The sheriff's deputy said there was no criminal action being taken tonight, but that he had been asked to be present to ensure a peaceful departure, and that if everyone cooperated, that is exactly what it would remain. He was professional and calm, and he made it clear with the tone of a man who has done this many times that the cooperation was not optional. They collected their things. My son-in-law's father came down the stairs with his coat over his arm and his envelope in his hand, and he did not say a single word to anyone on his way out, which in my experience is what happens when a man suddenly understands the precise extent of his exposure. His wife followed him. My son-in-law was last. He stopped in the doorway and looked at me. He said he hoped I was satisfied. He said I had just ended my daughter's marriage and her financial future, and I would spend the rest of my life knowing that. He said I was going to die alone in this house after all. I told him I had died alone in this house every night for 4 years since my wife passed, and that I was still standing. He left. The door closed. My daughter was sitting on the bottom stair with her face in her hands. Walter put his hand on her shoulder on his way to the kitchen to start a pot of coffee. The deputies stood in the entry for a few minutes, completing their paperwork, and then they left quietly, and the woman from the Secretary of State's office gave me a card and told me to call if I needed anything, and she left too. I sat down on the stair next to my daughter. She said she was sorry. She said it 5 or 6 times. She said she had known for a long time that something was wrong, and she had told herself that she was imagining it or exaggerating it, or that it would resolve itself, and that she had told herself that leaving would hurt me, that I would think she had failed at something. She was crying in a way that told me she had been holding this particular cry for a very long time. I told her she had not failed at anything. I told her that some men are very good at making the people who love them feel responsible for things they are not responsible for. I told her that her mother had seen it the first night she brought him home, and that I should have listened, and that I was sorry I had told her she was being overprotective when she was being right. My daughter put her head on my shoulder. She said, "Mom was always right." I said, "She really was." Walter brought coffee. We sat in the kitchen, the 3 of us, with the remains of Christmas dinner still on the counter and the nativity scene in pieces in the fireplace and the quitclaim deed still on the dining room table. I picked up the deed on my way past and I put it in the recycling bin under the sink. Later, after my daughter had gone upstairs to the room where she grew up, and after Walter and I had cleaned the kitchen and put away the leftover roast and washed the good china by hand, the way my wife always insisted it had to be washed, I told Walter there was something I needed to tell him. We sat down at the kitchen table with 2 fingers of bourbon each, and I told him what I had never told anyone. I told him about the patent. 22 years ago, while I was still working at the hospital pharmacy, I developed a compound stabilization process for a class of chemotherapy medications that were notoriously difficult to formulate for pediatric patients. The doses for children had always involved complicated dilution procedures that were labor-intensive and introduced variability. My process standardized the preparation and significantly extended the shelf life. I filed the patent myself with help from a patent attorney I found in the phone book. I did not tell the hospital because the process had been developed on my own time, on my own equipment, with no hospital resources. The attorney confirmed I was within my rights. The patent was acquired by a pharmaceutical manufacturer 18 months later for what seemed at the time like an extraordinary amount of money. I invested almost all of it. I told my wife and no one else. We lived the same way we had always lived. We drove the same cars. We shopped the same stores. My wife said that money changes the people who know about it before it changes the people who have it, and she did not want any part of her life changed by what she could not see. The patent royalties continued for 19 years, until the original patent term expired, by which point the invested principal had grown into something I still sometimes find difficult to look at directly. Walter looked at me for a long time after I finished telling him this. He said, "How much, George?" I told him. He picked up his bourbon glass. He set it down without drinking from it. He said, "And your son-in-law had no idea." I said no one had any idea, not even my daughter. Walter was quiet for a while. He turned his glass in slow circles on the table. Then he said, "What are you going to do with it?" I told him I had already started doing something with it. 3 months ago, when I first understood what my son-in-law was building toward, I had called the attorney who managed my trust, and I had made a change to my estate documents. The house was already in a separate, irrevocable trust that could not be signed over to anyone, which was why the quitclaim deed would never have worked regardless of what I signed. More importantly, I had taken a significant portion of the investment account and directed it towards something that had been sitting in my mind since my wife's last hospitalization. The pediatric oncology unit at the university hospital where my wife had been treated in her final months was chronically underfunded. The nurses there had treated my wife with a gentleness and a thoroughness that I thought about almost every day. The unit director had told me during one of my visits that they had a waiting list for a clinical research program they could not staff because they could not fund the positions. I had written a check that took the waiting list to zero and funded the program for 15 years. The gift was anonymous, made through the trust, under my wife's name. The rest I had organized into a straightforward structure. A portion for my daughter outright, hers without condition or complication, because she had earned something clean and uncomplicated. A portion to Walter. A portion to 3 or 4 institutions my wife believed in, and enough retained in the trust to keep the house standing and the taxes paid and the mortgage that did not exist confirmed to not exist for the rest of whatever time I had. Walter finished his bourbon. He said, "Emily would have liked this very much." I said I thought so too. We sat there for a while in the kitchen, not talking. The house was quiet in the way it always is on Christmas night. That particular stillness that feels different from other nights, heavier with things that have been said and things that are over. I thought about my son-in-law driving away in the car with his parents, the paperwork in his lap, the future he had constructed in his mind coming apart at every seam. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt the way I imagine a surgeon feels after a necessary procedure, relieved that it was done, and very tired, and aware that recovery was going to be long. Before I went to bed, I walked through the house once, room by room. I looked at the photographs on the walls, my wife in the garden, the summer we planted the roses, my daughter at 6 years old standing on the back porch in her mother's rain boots, my brother and me the Christmas we were both in college, standing in front of our parents' tree with our arms around each other, grinning at something already forgotten. I picked up the 3 largest pieces of the nativity scene from the fireplace hearth. The angel was intact. The shepherd was broken at the knees but still recognizable. The small ceramic stable itself was cracked down the middle but held together by the paint. I set them on the mantel, not to display them, just because they deserved to be put somewhere with some care rather than left on the floor. Then I turned off the lights downstairs, one by one, and I walked upstairs to my bedroom. And I lay down on my side of the bed, on my side, which is the only side I have slept on since April of 2021, and I looked at the ceiling in the dark. Somewhere down the hall, my daughter was sleeping in the room where she grew up. My brother was in the guest room. The house was full in a way it had not been in a long time, and the fullness was the right kind, the kind that comes from people who are actually on your side, which is rarer and more valuable than most of us understand, until it is the only thing standing between us and the dark. I closed my eyes. I thought about what I would tell my daughter in the morning, not about the money. That could wait, just that she was loved and capable and that her mother had been proud of her from the beginning, and that her father was too, and that starting over at 37 with nothing but your own good sense is not a tragedy. It is a beginning, and that the women in this family had always been better at beginnings than endings. I thought I would also call the hospital in the morning and leave a voicemail for the unit director. Not to take credit, just to ask how the program was going, just to hear that something good was happening somewhere, with a fraction of a life's work. And I thought, before sleep took me, that my wife had been right about all of it. About him, about the money, about the way you protect what matters most, by not making it visible to people who only know how to consume. She was always right. If you know someone who has had to protect what is theirs from the people who were supposed to love them, share this with them. And if you have ever had to let go of someone in order to save yourself, subscribe and hit the bell, because there are more of these stories coming, and every single one of them ends with the right people still standing.